The fork clattered against the china plate, a sound that would echo in my mind for months. My daughter Sarah's voice cut through the polished dinner conversation like a blade through silk. Cancel it. 2 words. Just 2 words that made the crystal chandelier above us seem to swing, though it stood perfectly still. Around the mahogany table in our Wilmette dining room sat both families. Sarah's future in-laws, the Hendersons, dressed in their Sunday best, my husband Tom looking pleased as Punch in his tailored blazer, and me, frozen mid-sip of Merlot. The wedding invitations had already gone out to 180 guests. The deposits were paid. The dress hung in Sarah's childhood closet upstairs, a confection of imported lace that had cost more than my first car. "Cancel it," she repeated, and this time her fiancé Brandon reached for her hand across the table, his knuckles white. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 3 months, to when I still believed in the fairy tale we'd constructed. When I thought the biggest stress in my life was choosing between the salmon or the chicken for the reception dinner. 3 months earlier, I was standing in the kitchen of our North Shore home, sunlight streaming through the bay windows, making plans that felt like building castles in the air. Sarah had just gotten engaged to Brandon Henderson, a corporate attorney from a family that made our comfortable upper-middle-class life look quaint. The Hendersons owned property in Lake Forest, had a summer house in Door County, and Brandon's father, Richard, had made his fortune in commercial real estate development. When Brandon proposed to Sarah on a yacht in Lake Michigan, I cried happy tears. My baby girl was marrying up, as my mother would have said, though I hated that phrase. Tom had been ecstatic. My husband of 28 years, a financial consultant with a modest but steady income, had always wanted the best for Sarah. "Nothing's too good for our girl," he'd say, pulling me close in the kitchen. "This wedding is going to be the event of the season. The Hendersons will see that the Walsh family knows how to throw a celebration." I should have questioned why he cared so much about impressing them. I should have wondered why a man who'd always preached fiscal responsibility was suddenly talking about ice sculptures and string quartets. But love makes you blind, doesn't it? Or maybe it's not love. Maybe it's habit. The comfortable numbness of nearly 3 decades together. You know what I mean, right? That feeling when you stop really looking at your partner and start just seeing the outline of them, the shape they're supposed to be. The wedding planning consumed everything. Sarah and I spent weekends touring venues across Chicagoland, the Chicago History Museum, the Art Institute, Botanical Gardens in Glencoe. We finally settled on a historic estate in Lake Forest, a sprawling property with gardens that would photograph like a dream. The price tag made my stomach flip, but Tom waved away my concerns. "I've been setting aside money for years," he assured me. "We have a special fund for exactly this. Don't you worry about a thing, Marie." I remember the day we toured that venue in Lake Forest. It was a Saturday in late June, the kind of perfect Chicago summer day when the humidity hasn't quite set in yet, and everything smells like fresh-cut grass and possibility. The estate manager, a woman named Colette with a French accent and impeccable taste, led us through manicured gardens where roses climbed trellises and a stone fountain burbled peacefully. Sarah clutched my hand, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Mom, this is it," she whispered. "This is where I want to marry Brandon." Tom walked ahead of us, talking numbers with Colette, nodding seriously as she explained the different packages, basic, premium, and luxury. I watched him pull out his phone, probably checking our accounts, doing the mental math. He turned back to us with that confident smile I'd trusted for so many years. "We'll take the luxury package," he announced. "Nothing but the best for our Sarah." Colette beamed. "Wonderful choice. That includes the garden ceremony space, the ballroom reception, white chair covers, upgraded linens, and of course, our exclusive catering menu. We'll need a deposit of 30% to hold the date. That would be $15,000. My breath caught. $15,000, just for the deposit. Tom didn't even flinch. "No problem," he said smoothly. I'll write you a check right now. I felt Sarah's hand tighten on mine. Tom, that's so generous. Are you sure? Absolutely sure. Sweetheart, your mother and I have been planning for this day since you were born. That fund. God, that fund. If I'd known then what I know now, I would have demanded to see the statements right then and there. But I trusted him. 28 years of marriage, and I trusted him completely. That's the thing about trust. It's built brick by brick over years, and it can be demolished in an instant. The strain started showing in small ways. My back began aching constantly, a dull throb that settled between my shoulder blades and never quite left. I'd wake up at 3 a.m, my mind racing through seating charts and vendor contracts, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in the quiet darkness. Tom would be sleeping soundly beside me, snoring softly, while I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember if I'd confirmed the florist or if that had been a dream. You need to see a doctor, my sister Linda told me over coffee at a cafe in Evanston. She'd flown in from Denver to help with the wedding planning, and she'd taken one look at me and frowned. Marie, you look exhausted. When's the last time you had a physical? I laughed it off. Who has time for doctors? There's a wedding in 3 months. I'll rest after. Linda set down her latte, her expression serious. That's what Mom said before her heart attack. Remember? I'll rest after the holidays. I'll see a doctor after Dad's retirement party. And then she collapsed in the grocery store. The comparison stung because it was accurate. Our mother had been a champion at putting everyone else first, at running herself into the ground for the sake of family events and obligations. I'd promised myself I'd be different, yet here I was, following the exact same pattern. I'm fine, Linda. Really, it's just stress. Stress kills people, Marie. That's not dramatic. It's medical fact. Your body is trying to tell you something. But I couldn't rest. My mind wouldn't let me. Because underneath all the planning and the stress, something wasn't adding up. Little things, tiny discrepancies that I pushed aside because I had napkin colors to choose and a cake tasting to attend. Tom had always handled our finances. It was easier that way, he said, since he worked in the field. I had access to our joint checking account. But the savings, the investments, the special funds, those were his domain. I trusted him. I keep saying that, don't I? I trusted him. The cake tasting was on a Wednesday afternoon in July. Sarah, Emma, and I met at a boutique bakery in Old Town, a charming little shop with exposed brick walls and the scent of vanilla and butter thick in the air. The owner, a pastry chef named Dominique, had prepared 6 different sample cakes, each more elaborate than the last. Emma, always the practical one, had brought a notebook to rate each flavor. At 16, she approached wedding planning with the same analytical precision she brought to her AP classes. Okay, Grandma, Mom, we need to consider not just taste, but also presentation, dietary restrictions for guests, and whether it photographs well. Sarah laughed. When did you become a wedding planner? Someone has to keep us organized, Emma said primly, though her eyes sparkled with affection. You two just get emotional and want to order everything. She wasn't wrong. As we tasted our way through champagne vanilla, chocolate ganache, lemon elderflower, and red velvet, I felt tears pricking my eyes. This moment, 3 generations of women, sharing something sweet and planning a celebration of love. This was what life was supposed to be about. Simple, genuine, real. The lemon elderflower is amazing, Sarah said, closing her eyes to savor it. But is it too, I don't know, too trendy? Mom, you're overthinking this, Emma said. If you love it, that's all that matters. But even in that perfect moment, something was nagging at me. The bakery required a 50% deposit when we ordered, another $3,000. Tom had told me to put it on the credit card, that he'd pay it off from the wedding fund. But which credit card? We had a joint one that I monitored, but I'd noticed charges appearing on our statements for things I didn't recognize. When I asked Tom, he always had explanations. Business expenses, he said, that would be reimbursed. But were they? Grandma? Emma's voice pulled me back. You okay? You looked like you were a million miles away. Just thinking about logistics, I lied, forcing a smile. You're right about the lemon elderflower. Let's do it. As Dominique wrote up our order and I handed over the credit card, I made a mental note to check the balance when I got home, just to be sure, just to ease the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach that had nothing to do with wedding planning and everything to do with the man I'd married. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in September. I was at the bank, depositing a check from my part-time work at the local library. The teller, a young woman named Jessica, who'd helped me before, smiled as she processed the transaction. How's the wedding planning going, Mrs. Walsh? Tom mentioned you're throwing quite the event. It's coming along, I said, returning her smile. Crazy expensive, but worth it for our daughter. Something flickered across her face, just for a second. A look I couldn't quite read. Well, I'm sure it'll be beautiful, she said, handing me my receipt. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, make sure you're keeping track of everything. I laughed. Oh, I have spreadsheets that would make your head spin. No, I mean... She glanced around, then leaned slightly closer. Just keep an eye on all the accounts. Both of you should always know where the money's going. It was such an odd thing to say. I left the bank feeling unsettled, like someone had shifted the furniture in a familiar room just enough to make me stumble. That night, I mentioned it to Tom while we were getting ready for bed. He was in his pajamas, checking his phone, the blue light making his face look strange and unfamiliar. Tom, that teller at the bank said something weird today. He didn't look up. Oh yeah? What's that? She suggested I should be tracking our accounts more closely, like both of us should know where the money's going. Now he looked up, and his expression was carefully neutral. Too neutral. Well, that's good advice for anyone, I suppose. We do track our accounts, Marie. You can check the joint account anytime you want. I know, but she specifically said, all the accounts. Like there's something I don't know about. Tom set his phone down and came to sit beside me on the bed. He took my hand, and his palm was warm and dry and familiar. Honey, you're stressed. This wedding has you wound up tighter than a spring. That teller probably just gives that speech to everyone. You know, financial literacy and all that. There's nothing to worry about. I've got everything under control. I wanted to believe him, so I did, because it was easier than facing the alternative, easier than pulling on that thread and watching our whole life unravel. Research shows that 23% of people have hidden debts from their partners. 23%. But I didn't know that statistic then. I didn't know a lot of things. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of dress fittings and menu tastings. Sarah was radiating happiness, her whole face glowing whenever she talked about Brandon. The Hendersons were gracious and generous, offering to cover the bar tab for the reception and insisting on flying in a renowned photographer from New York. I should have been happy. I should have been floating on air. Instead, I felt like I was walking on ice that was slowly cracking beneath my feet. The dress fittings were particularly excruciating. Not because of the dress. Sarah looked absolutely breathtaking in the lace gown we'd chosen from a boutique in downtown Chicago. The problem was the conversation that inevitably arose each time we visited the seamstress. How are you paying for all this? Patricia Henderson had asked one afternoon, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. She'd insisted on coming to one of the fittings, wanting to see Sarah in her dress. This dress alone must have cost a fortune, and the venue, the flowers, the photographer Richard found, it all adds up so quickly. I'd felt my cheeks flush. Tom's been saving for years. We're fortunate to be able to give Sarah the wedding she deserves. Of course, Patricia had said. But something in her expression made me think she didn't quite believe me. Or maybe I was just projecting my own growing doubts onto everyone around me. My health continued to deteriorate. The backaches turned into full-body tension that made my muscles feel like they'd been wrung out and hung to dry. Headaches bloomed behind my eyes with increasing frequency. I started forgetting things, appointments, phone calls, whether I'd eaten lunch. Linda kept pushing me to see a doctor, but I kept putting it off. What was I supposed to say? I think planning my daughter's wedding is literally killing me? It sounded ridiculous even in my own head. Then came the receipt. Such a small thing. A slip of paper that fell out of Tom's jacket pocket when I was taking it to the dry cleaners. I almost didn't look at it. Why would I? But something made me unfold it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was that same nagging feeling that had been growing in my chest since the bank. The receipt was from a restaurant in downtown Chicago, Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse, dated from the previous Wednesday. $247. Tom had told me he was working late that Wednesday. He'd texted around 7 saying he'd grab something at his desk. I'd eaten leftover pasta alone in our kitchen, watching the sun set over the backyard. My hands started shaking. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a client dinner he'd forgotten to mention. Maybe it was a business expense. But $247 for one person seemed excessive even for Gibson's. And if it was a business dinner, why hadn't he mentioned it? I did what any woman in my position would do. I started looking for more. Not because I wanted to find anything. God, no. I was hoping I wouldn't. I was praying that I'd search through all his things and find nothing and be able to laugh at myself for being paranoid. But that's not what happened. In his home office, in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, I found statements, not from our joint account, not from the savings account I knew about. These were from a separate account at a different bank entirely, an account in Tom's name only, an account that had been receiving regular deposits for the past 5 years. Small amounts at first, 100 here, 200 there, then larger, 500, 1,000, sometimes more. All categorized as transfers from our joint account. The room started spinning. I sat down hard in Tom's leather desk chair, the statements spread out in front of me like accusations. Over 5 years, he'd moved more than $60,000 into this secret account. $60,000. Money that should have been ours. Money that I'd never known existed. I thought about all the times I'd suggested taking a real vacation and he'd said we needed to save. I thought about the leaky roof we'd put off fixing. I thought about the car I'd been driving for 12 years while he'd upgraded his sedan twice. $60,000. You ever doubt your own sanity? Like really, truly question whether your brain is processing reality correctly. That's where I was, sitting in that office, holding proof of my husband's deception, and still trying to find a way to make it make sense. Maybe it was for the wedding, I told myself. Maybe this was the special fund he'd mentioned, and he just kept it separate for some reason. Maybe there was an explanation that didn't mean what I thought it meant. But then I found the withdrawal history. Large sums removed over the past 2 years. 10,000 here, 15,000 there. Not going toward wedding vendors. I had all those receipts, all those checks written from our joint account. This money was going somewhere else, somewhere he'd never mentioned, somewhere he'd actively hidden from me. I took pictures of everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to take some shots multiple times to get them in focus. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I wasn't ready to confront him yet. Maybe I needed more information. Maybe I was just a coward. That night at dinner, I watched him across the table, this man I'd shared a bed with for 28 years, and I wondered who he was. He was telling Sarah about a potential venue upgrade, his face animated and proud, talking about adding a second band for dancing, and all I could think was, where is that money coming from? The secret account? Our joint funds? Some third source I haven't discovered yet? Mom, you okay? Sarah's voice pulled me back to the table. They were both looking at me, Tom with mild concern, Sarah with her brow furrowed. Fine, sweetheart. Just tired. This wedding planning is a lot. Tom reached over and squeezed my hand. We're almost there, honey. Just a few more months, and then everything will be perfect. You'll see. It'll all be worth it. His hand felt like a stranger's. I pulled away and reached for my water glass, unable to meet his eyes. A betrayal this deep doesn't heal, I realized. It scars over if you're lucky. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay next to Tom in the darkness, listening to him breathe, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to fall apart. I was going to find out exactly what my husband had been hiding, and I was going to do it without him suspecting a thing. Because if 28 years had taught me anything, it was that Tom Walsh was very, very good at lying, and I needed to be better at uncovering the truth. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not for divorce, not yet, just for a consultation. I told the receptionist I needed advice about protecting assets. She scheduled me for the following Tuesday. Then I called a private investigator whose card I'd seen on a bulletin board at the library. I didn't leave my name. I just asked about services and prices. Information gathering, he called it, surveillance, background checks. I thanked him and hung up, my heart pounding like I'd just committed a crime. Then I went downstairs and made Tom his breakfast. Exactly the way I had every morning for 28 years. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, orange juice. I kissed him on the cheek when he left for work. I waved from the doorway as his car pulled out of the driveway. I was the perfect wife. The trusting wife. The wife who didn't know a damn thing. But inside, I was already building my case. Brick by brick. Question by question. I was done being blind. I was done being paralyzed by love or habit or whatever this thing was that had kept me from seeing clearly. My daughter was getting married in less than 3 months, and before she walked down that aisle, I was going to know every single truth my husband had been hiding, even if it killed me, even if it destroyed everything. The investigation started small. I began by going through our joint checking account with a fine-tooth comb, something I should have been doing all along but had trusted Tom to handle. Every transaction, every withdrawal, every transfer, I created a spreadsheet that would have made an accountant weep with joy. Color-coded categories, cross-referenced dates, notes on anything that seemed even slightly off. I told Tom I was organizing our records for tax purposes. He barely looked up from his laptop. "That's great, honey. You're so good at that stuff." The lies came so easily to him now that I could see them clearly. Or maybe they'd always been this easy, and I'd just never been looking. I thought about the old saying that you can't con an honest man. Maybe the corollary was that you can't lie to someone who's paying attention. I found patterns, withdrawals that happened like clockwork, every other Thursday. Amounts that seemed random, but, when I added them up, formed suspiciously round numbers. Transfers categorized as household expenses that didn't match up with anything we'd actually purchased. It was like watching someone paint by numbers, except the picture they were creating was my financial ruin. One evening, I decided to test him. We were having dinner, just the two of us, and I casually mentioned that I'd been looking at our checking account and noticed some larger than usual withdrawals. "Oh, those," Tom said, not missing a beat. "Client entertainment. You know how it is in my business. You have to wine and dine people to keep them happy. It's all standard operating procedure. $3,000 in 1 month seems like a lot for client entertainment." He smiled, that easy, confident smile I'd once found so reassuring. "Marie, sweetheart, I bring in 10 times that amount from those clients. It's an investment. Trust me, I know what I'm doing." Trust me. Those 2 words that I'd lived by for nearly 3 decades now sounded like mockery. But I kept my expression neutral, nodded, and changed the subject to something about Sarah's honeymoon plans. Inside, though, I was cataloging every word, every gesture, every tiny tell that might help me understand the full scope of his deception. But the joint account was just the surface. The real mystery was that secret account and where all that money had gone. I couldn't exactly call the bank and ask about an account I wasn't supposed to know existed. So, I did the next best thing. I became a detective in my own home. I started with his computer. Tom's office was usually locked when he wasn't home, but I'd noticed he'd been getting careless lately, caught up in his own web of secrets. One afternoon, after he'd left for a client meeting, I found the door unlocked. His laptop was sitting on his desk, closed, but not password protected when I opened it. My hands were sweating as I touched the trackpad. His email was a treasure trove, confirmations for purchases I'd never seen, receipts for dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, and messages. God, the messages, nothing romantic. That would have been almost easier to process. These were worse. Messages to Brandon's father, Richard Henderson. Casual, friendly exchanges about business opportunities, investment schemes, partnership possibilities. Tom had been positioning himself, trying to wedge into Richard's world of commercial real estate deals and high finance opportunities. One email made my blood run cold. It was from 6 months ago, right after Sarah had announced her engagement. Tom had written to Richard, "Now that our families are joining, I'd love to discuss some investment opportunities. I have capital available and I'm looking for the right partnership. Perhaps we could meet for drinks?" Richard's response had been polite but non-committal. "Always happy to discuss business, Tom. Let's set something up after the holidays." But Tom hadn't waited. I found a whole chain of emails where he'd been persistent, almost pushy, suggesting specific properties and development projects, talking about his available capital and his interest in diversifying his portfolio. Richard's responses had grown progressively cooler, more distant, until finally he'd written, "Tom, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I only partner with people I've worked with for years. Let's focus on getting our kids down the aisle first, shall we?" That email was from 2 months ago. Tom had never mentioned any of this to me, never said a word about trying to become Richard Henderson's business partner. And yet he'd been spending our money, my money, trying to create the illusion that he belonged in their world. Capital available. He was using our money, my money, to try to buy his way into Richard Henderson's business world. The secret account wasn't just about hiding money from me. It was about creating the illusion that Tom Walsh was a man of means, someone worthy of partnering with the Hendersons. He was using our daughter's wedding as a networking opportunity, and he was funding it with money he'd stolen from our joint savings. I printed everything. Quietly, carefully, while my heart hammered so hard, I thought I might pass out right there in his office. I saved copies to a flash drive. I took photos with my phone. I documented everything like I was building a legal case because I was starting to realize that's exactly what this might become. The next piece of the puzzle came from the private investigator I'd been too scared to actually hire. But after finding those emails, I called him back. His name was Marcus Chen, and he worked out of a small office in downtown Evanston. When I met with him on a gray October afternoon, he didn't judge me. He just listened, took notes, and quoted me a price that made me wince. I paid him with money from the library job, cash that Tom never knew about because I'd always just used it for personal expenses. Coffee with friends, birthday gifts, small luxuries. Now it was buying me the truth. Marcus's office was sparse but professional. A desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and a coffee maker that looked like it had been working overtime. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Walsh," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk, "tell me everything." And I did. I told him about the secret account, the mysterious withdrawals, the emails to Richard Henderson, the receipt from Gibson's. I told him about 28 years of marriage and how I'd never once questioned Tom's handling of our finances. I told him about my growing suspicion that the wedding fund he'd been promising was nothing but smoke and mirrors. Marcus took notes in a small leather notebook, his pen moving quickly across the pages. When I finished, he looked up at me with an expression that was both sympathetic and professionally detached. "How much do you want to know?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes people come to me wanting confirmation of suspicions. They want enough information to confront a spouse or make a decision, but they don't want every detail. Other people want to know everything, Every transaction, every meeting, every lie. Which type are you? I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to say I just needed the basics, enough to protect myself legally. But that was the old Marie talking, the one who'd spent 28 years avoiding uncomfortable truths. The new Marie, the one who'd been forced into existence by Tom's deception, needed to know it all. Everything, I said firmly. I want to know everything. Marcus nodded as if he'd expected that answer. Okay, this is going to take some time, and it won't be cheap. I'll need to run background checks, surveillance, financial analysis. Are you prepared for what I might find? I don't know, I admitted, but I need to know anyway. Marcus worked fast. Within a week, he had surveillance photos of Tom's client dinners. Most were exactly what they appeared to be, boring business meetings with actual clients, but not all of them. There was the dinner at Gibson's, and Tom wasn't alone. He was with Richard Henderson and two other men I didn't recognize. Marcus identified them as partners in one of Richard's development firms. They looked chummy, like old friends, glasses of expensive scotch in hand and thick steaks on their plates. But there was another photo that disturbed me even more. Tom at a country club in Lake Forest, one that charged $20,000 a year in membership fees. A country club we definitely didn't belong to. Marcus had discovered that Tom had been using a guest pass, courtesy of someone he'd met through his networking efforts. He'd been spending his afternoons there, playing golf and having drinks in the clubhouse, pretending to be someone he wasn't. Your husband is trying to invest in Henderson's business, Marcus told me in his office, sliding the photos across his desk. From what I can gather, he's been pitching himself as a potential partner. Silent investor type. He's been talking about having liquid capital, claiming he's been setting aside money for years for exactly this kind of opportunity. But he doesn't have that kind of money, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Everything we have is joint. Our savings, our retirement accounts. Except for this account. Marcus pulled out bank statements. I don't know how he got them, and I didn't ask. They showed the secret account, but with more detail than the statements I'd found. Regular deposits from our joint account, just like I'd discovered. But also deposits from another source, a business account in Tom's name. He's been running money through a consulting LLC he set up 3 years ago. Taking payments from clients, but instead of declaring all of it as income and paying taxes, he's been skimming and funneling it into this personal account. My vision blurred. This wasn't just lying to me anymore. This was tax fraud. This was illegal. How much? In the secret account right now? About $32,000, but he's already withdrawn and spent more than that over the past 2 years. My guess is he's been using it to wine and dine the Hendersons, trying to create this image of himself as someone who moves in their circles. The withdrawals match up with expensive dinners, country club fees, tickets to charity events, all places where Richard Henderson and his associates would be. I felt sick, actually physically ill, like I might throw up right there on Marcus Chen's industrial carpet. And the wedding fund he's been talking about? The special account he says he's been building for years? Marcus's expression was sympathetic. Mrs. Walsh, based on what I'm seeing, that fund doesn't exist. Or if it does, it's been depleted. The money for your daughter's wedding is coming from somewhere, but I'd bet it's either from your joint account or from credit. You might want to check if he's taken out any loans in his name. Loans. The word hit me like a physical blow. How would I even check that? I can look into it for you. It'll take a few more days, but I have resources. I nodded numbly, authorizing him to continue the investigation. When I left his office that afternoon, the October sun was setting early, casting long shadows across the Evanston streets. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process everything I'd learned. Tom wasn't just hiding money. He was committing crimes. He was building a fantasy life on a foundation of fraud and deception, and he was using our daughter's wedding as a prop in his elaborate charade. The man I'd married, the man I'd trusted with everything, was a stranger. Worse than a stranger. A criminal. I drove home in a daze. My daughter's wedding, this beautiful, expensive celebration we'd been planning for months, was being funded by stolen money and lies. Every deposit we'd put down, every vendor we'd booked, it was all tainted. Built on a foundation of deception so deep I was only beginning to understand its depths. That night, I couldn't pretend anymore. When Tom came home from work, cheerful and relaxed, talking about his day like everything was normal, something inside me snapped, not into rage, not yet, into cold, crystalline clarity. "Tom, we need to talk about money." He looked up from loosening his tie, surprised. "Okay, what about it?" "I want to see all our accounts, everything, savings, retirement, investments. I want to sit down together and go through it all." His face did something complicated. A flash of panic quickly smoothed over with confusion. "Why? What's wrong? Did something happen?" "Nothing's wrong. I just think it's time I'm more involved. You've been handling everything for so long, and with the wedding expenses, I want to make sure we're on solid ground." "Marie, I told you, we're fine. The wedding fund is healthy. We're not going into debt. You don't need to worry about this stuff. That's what I'm here for." "Show me." "What?" "Show me the wedding fund, the statements. I want to see them." For the first time in 28 years, I watched my husband squirm. Actually, physically uncomfortable, shifting his weight, his eyes darting away from mine. "I don't have them here. They're at the office. I can bring them home tomorrow." "Then let's go to your office, right now." "Marie, what is this about? You're acting paranoid. Is Linda putting ideas in your head? Because I know she's always been suspicious of—" "This has nothing to do with Linda." My voice was steady, calm, cold. "This has to do with me wanting to see documentation of the account you've been claiming exists for years. That's reasonable, isn't it? For a wife to want to see the family finances?" He stared at me, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew, how much I'd discovered. Finally, he sighed. "Okay, you're right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel shut out. I'll bring everything home tomorrow and we'll go through it together. I promise." But I'd seen it, that moment of panic, that flash of a trapped animal looking for an exit. He was lying, again, still, always. I didn't sleep that night either. I lay in bed, rigid and awake, listening to the sound of Tom's breathing and thinking about 12%. 12% of abuse is committed by dishonest businesses and professionals, people in positions of trust who use that trust as a weapon. Tom wasn't hitting me. He wasn't screaming. He was doing something worse. He was slowly, methodically stealing my financial security and my peace of mind while convincing me I was crazy for questioning him. Have you ever felt like this? Like the ground beneath you isn't solid anymore? Like everything you thought you knew about your life might be a carefully constructed illusion? I know some of you have. I can hear you thinking, leave him. Just leave. But it's not that simple when it's 28 years of your life, when there's a daughter's wedding in 8 weeks, when every choice feels like it might shatter everything. The next day, Tom did bring home papers, financial statements that showed healthy balances and reassuring numbers. He spread them out on the dining room table with the air of someone proving a point. "See? Everything's fine. We're actually in better shape than I thought. The wedding fund is solid, our retirement is on track, and we have a good cushion in savings." I looked at the papers. They were convincing. They showed accounts at our regular bank, reasonable balances, steady growth. If I hadn't already known about the secret account, about the skimmed money and the illegal maneuvering, I might have believed him. I might have felt relieved and apologetic for doubting. Instead, I felt my rage calcify into something hard and purposeful. He'd prepared these papers, probably stayed up late last night, putting together this convincing picture of our finances, knowing I'd ask to see them. This was premeditated deception. This was him looking me in the eye and handing me carefully curated lies. "Thank you," I said quietly. This is helpful. He looked relieved. He actually looked relieved. I'm glad. I know the wedding has been stressful, and I should have been more transparent from the beginning. From now on, we'll review everything together, okay? No more secrets. No more secrets. I almost laughed. Instead, I smiled and nodded and began planning his downfall. Over the next few weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. A woman who could smile over breakfast while plotting her husband's exposure. A woman who could discuss seating charts with Sarah while building a dossier of evidence. I met with Marcus Chen twice more. I consulted with the lawyer who confirmed that Tom's actions were not just unethical, but potentially criminal. I gathered every scrap of proof I could find: bank statements, emails, surveillance photos, credit card receipts. I built a case that would be undeniable. The lawyer's name was Rebecca Thornton, and she practiced family law in a high-rise office in downtown Chicago. She was in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and an air of competence that immediately put me at ease. When I showed her everything I'd gathered, the statements, the emails, Marcus's surveillance photos, she went through it all with methodical precision. "Mrs. Walsh," she said finally, looking up from the documents spread across her conference table, "your husband has committed multiple crimes: tax evasion, fraud, possibly forgery if those loan documents were signed without your knowledge or consent. This goes far beyond a typical marital asset dispute. What does that mean for me? It means you need to protect yourself immediately. We need to freeze joint accounts, file for legal separation, and possibly cooperate with federal authorities if they decide to pursue criminal charges. This is serious, Marie. He's not just lying to you. He's broken the law." "And Sarah's wedding?" My voice cracked on my daughter's name. Rebecca's expression softened. "That's ultimately your decision. But if it were me, I'd want to know where every penny came from before I let my daughter walk down an aisle purchased with potentially illegal funds." And I kept playing the perfect wife. I laughed at his jokes. I let him kiss me goodnight. I discussed the wedding timeline and the honeymoon plans like nothing was wrong. It was the best acting of my life, and it was exhausting. My body was paying the price. The backaches turned into full spasms. The headaches became migraines that left me vomiting in the bathroom while Tom slept. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I was so close to the truth. The final piece came from an unexpected source: my granddaughter, Emma. She was Sarah's daughter from a previous relationship, a sharp-eyed 16-year-old who'd been helping with wedding preparations. Emma had always been perceptive, the kind of kid who saw more than adults gave her credit for. She cornered me one afternoon while we were addressing invitations in Sarah's apartment. Sarah had stepped out to take a call from the florist, leaving Emma and me alone with stacks of cream-colored envelopes. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Is Grandpa Tom okay? Like, financially?" I looked up sharply. "What makes you ask that?" Emma bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable. "I heard him on the phone a few weeks ago. I was at your house helping Mom with something, and I went upstairs to use the bathroom. His office door was open a crack and he was talking really loud. He sounded desperate. He was talking about needing an extension on something, and interest rates, and how he just needed a few more months." My heart stopped. "What else did you hear?" "He said something about the Henderson deal falling through, that he'd counted on it and now he was in a bind. Then he heard me in the hall and shut the door really fast. I didn't think much of it at the time, but—" She looked at me with those clear, honest eyes. "Grandma, you don't have to go through anything alone. If something's wrong, I'm here. Mom's here. We'll help you." I wanted to cry. This child, this beautiful, perceptive child, was offering me a lifeline in the middle of my drowning. Instead, I took her hand and squeezed it. "Thank you, Emma. That means more than you know. But I'm handling it. I promise." "Are you sure? Because I've been worried about you. You look so tired all the time, and sometimes I catch you just staring off into space like you're carrying the weight of the world." "I am tired," I admitted. But I promise you I'm handling it. And when the time is right, I'll tell you and your mom everything. Okay? Emma nodded, but her eyes still held concern. Just remember, Grandma, you're stronger than you think. Whatever's happening, you can get through it. And I was, because Emma's information was the missing piece. The Henderson deal had fallen through. Whatever Tom had been planning, investing in Richard's business, buying his way into their world, it hadn't worked out. Which meant all that stolen money, all those lies and schemes, had been for nothing. He'd gambled our financial security on impressing the Hendersons, and he'd lost. Now I understood the desperation. The phone call Emma had overheard wasn't just about one bad investment. It was about Tom's whole house of cards collapsing. He'd taken out loans. He'd hidden money. He'd committed fraud. And now it was all coming due, right before his daughter's wedding, to the son of the man whose business he'd tried to infiltrate. I called Marcus one last time. I need you to find out about loans, any debts in Tom's name that I don't know about. Can you do that? I can try. Give me a few days. 3 days later, Marcus called me back. His voice was grim. Mrs. Walsh, you might want to sit down for this. I was at the library, shelving books in the reference section. I walked outside to the parking lot, sat in my car, and gripped the phone. Tell me. Tom had taken out 3 personal loans over the past 18 months, totaling $97,000. None of them had my signature. All of them used our home as collateral, though I'd never signed the paperwork. Marcus wasn't sure how Tom had managed it. Probably forged documents or exploited some loophole in Illinois property law. But the loans existed, and they were coming due. The first one was already in default. We could lose the house, I said, my voice hollow. If these loans aren't paid off, yes. And given the amounts we're talking about and what you've told me about your joint account balances, I don't see how they can be paid off without liquidating retirement funds or taking on more debt. $97,000, in addition to the $60,000 he'd already moved and spent from the secret account. We were talking about more than $150,000 in hidden debts and stolen funds. Our entire financial life was a lie. I thanked Marcus and hung up. Then I sat in my car in the library parking lot, and I screamed, just opened my mouth and let out all the rage and terror and betrayal that had been building for weeks. I screamed until my throat was raw and my hands were shaking and I felt empty. Then I drove home and made dinner, because Sarah and Brandon were coming over to discuss final wedding details, because life kept moving forward even when your world was ending, because I had a plan now, and I was going to execute it perfectly. That dinner was surreal. Sarah glowing with happiness, Brandon talking about their honeymoon plans to Italy, Tom playing the proud father-in-law-to-be, pouring wine and making toasts. I sat at the head of our table, in the home we might lose, eating pasta I barely tasted, and I thought about timing, about when to drop my bomb for maximum impact. Not yet. The wedding was in 6 weeks. I had to get through Sarah's big day without destroying it. But after the ceremony and the reception and the photographs and the happy ending, then would come the reckoning. Except I'd made a mistake. I'd forgotten to account for Emma. For her sharp eyes and her protective love, for her ability to piece together the fragments she'd observed, Tom's desperate phone call, my obvious stress, the tension crackling between us like static electricity. 3 days before Thanksgiving, Sarah called me, her voice tight and strange. Mom, we need to talk, all of us. Can you come to my place tonight? Bring Tom. What's wrong, honey? Just, please, both of you. 7 o'clock. When we arrived at Sarah's apartment that evening, I knew immediately that something had shifted. Emma was there, sitting on the couch with her arms crossed. Brandon's parents, Richard and Patricia Henderson, were seated in the living room chairs, their faces grave. Brandon stood behind Sarah, one hand on her shoulder. And Sarah herself looked like someone who'd just had the ground pulled out from under her. Mom. Tom. Sarah's voice shook. Emma told me some things she overheard. And I asked Brandon to have his father look into your finances, Tom. I hope you don't mind, but given that we're about to become family, Richard was willing to help. Tom's face went white. Sarah, sweetheart. I don't know what Emma thinks she heard, but stop. Sarah held up her hand. Richard found the loans, the secret account, the forged documents. He has connections at multiple banks, and he called in some favors. He knows everything, Tom. And now I do too. The room was silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. I was supposed to be in control of this revelation, the timing, the context. But Emma had taken it out of my hands, and part of me was grateful, because I didn't have to do this alone anymore. Richard Henderson leaned forward, his expression cold and businesslike. Mr. Walsh, I'm going to be very clear. You attempted to defraud me and my business partners. You misrepresented your financial situation, tried to leverage your daughter's relationship with my son to gain access to my investment opportunities, and in the process committed what appears to be tax evasion and document fraud. I have no interest in being connected to someone who operates this way. Richard, please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. The numbers speak for themselves. What I want to know is whether Marie was aware of any of this. All eyes turned to me. I could have lied, could have pretended innocence, let Tom take the fall alone. But I was so tired of lies, so exhausted by deception. I found out about 6 weeks ago, I said quietly. I've been investigating. I hired a private investigator. I have documentation of everything. I pulled the flash drive from my purse and held it up. Every transaction, every lie, every illegal move he made. I was going to wait until after the wedding to confront him, to protect Sarah's day. But now, I looked at my daughter, saw the devastation on her face. Now I guess that decision's been made for me. Tom was on his feet, his face red and desperate. Marie, you've been investigating me? You hired someone to spy on your own husband? You forged my signature on loan documents. You stole money from our joint account. You committed fraud. Yes, Tom, I investigated you. What did you expect me to do? I was trying to provide for us, to give us a better life. The Henderson connection was going to change everything. We could have been wealthy, really wealthy, not just comfortable. I did this for you, for Sarah. You did this for yourself. My voice was steady, cold. You wanted to be a big shot. You wanted to sit at Richard Henderson's table and feel like you belonged there. And you were willing to risk everything we had, our savings, our home, our daughter's trust, to feed your ego. Sarah was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Brandon had his arms around her, but he was looking at Tom with an expression of pure disgust. Emma just looked sad, like she regretted opening this particular Pandora's box, but knew it had been necessary. Patricia Henderson spoke for the first time, her voice gentle. Sarah, honey, whatever you want to do, we support you. If you want to postpone the wedding while you process this, we understand. If you want to go ahead as planned, we're there for you too. This is your decision. Sarah looked at her mother, me, with eyes that broke my heart. Mom, did you know about this when we were planning? When we were picking out flowers and trying on dresses and— Not at first. By the time I found out, we were already so deep into the planning. I didn't want to ruin your joy. I thought I could handle it quietly, deal with it after your wedding. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have told you sooner. And the money for the wedding? Where did that come from? I looked at Tom, who couldn't meet my eyes. Some of it came from our joint account, some from the money he'd been hiding. I don't know if any of it was from the fraudulent loans. We'd have to trace every transaction. Sarah stood up abruptly. Brandon's hands fell away from her shoulders. She walked to the window, staring out at the Chicago skyline, lights twinkling in the November darkness. When she turned back, her face was composed, but her voice was steel. Cancel it. Sarah, Brandon started. But she shook her head. Not us. The wedding. All of it. I can't walk down an aisle bought with stolen money and lies. I can't celebrate a marriage that started on a foundation of fraud. I won't. She looked at Tom with something like pity. You turned my wedding into a business opportunity. You used it to try to impress Brandon's father. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" Tom tried to speak, but no words came out. He just stood there. This man who'd been so confident, so certain he could talk his way out of anything, and he had nothing to say. Richard Henderson stood. "I'll make some calls, cancel the vendors, try to get whatever deposits can be refunded. Given the circumstances, most will probably be understanding." He looked at me. "Marie, I strongly suggest you consult with an attorney. Multiple attorneys. You're going to need legal representation for the financial issues and possibly criminal proceedings." "I already have a lawyer," I said quietly. "I've been preparing." He nodded, something like respect in his eyes. "Good. You're going to need every advantage you can get." The Hendersons left shortly after, taking Brandon with them. Emma hugged me tight before she went, whispering, "I'm sorry, Grandma, but you deserved to know the truth." I told her she'd done the right thing, even though part of me wanted to scream at the timing. Sarah sent Tom home, just told him to leave, that she couldn't look at him right now. He tried to argue, to explain, but she just kept repeating, "Go, now, please." Eventually, he left, shoulders hunched, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. When we were alone, Sarah, Emma, and me, Sarah broke down completely. She sobbed in my arms like she had when she was a little girl, and I held her and stroked her hair and tried not to cry myself. Because I needed to be strong. Because my daughter's dreams were in ashes, and it was partially my fault for not speaking up sooner. "We can still get married," Emma said softly. "Just not like this. Maybe something small. Justice of the peace. You and Brandon can still have your day. It doesn't have to be canceled forever." Sarah lifted her head, wiping her eyes. "Maybe. I don't know. I need time to think, to process. God, Mom, how are you so calm? After everything he did to you?" "I'm not calm," I admitted. "I'm furious. I've been furious for weeks, but I've had time to sit with it, to plan. You're just finding out. Of course, you're devastated." "What are you going to do?" "Legally, everything I can. He forged documents, committed fraud, evaded taxes. He's going to face consequences. Personally?" I took a deep breath. "I'm done. 28 years, and I'm done. I'll file for divorce as soon as the legal pieces are in place." "Do you need money? A place to stay?" I smiled despite everything. "I'll figure it out. I have some resources, and I have you." Sarah squeezed my hand. "Always, Mom, always." The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers and accountants and meetings with the IRS. Tom had indeed committed tax fraud, significant tax fraud. The loans he'd taken out were in default, and the banks were circling. Our house would have to be sold to cover the debts. Our retirement accounts would be depleted. Everything we'd built together was going to be dismantled piece by piece to pay for his mistakes. I moved into Sarah's guest room temporarily. Tom stayed in the house, hollow-eyed and defeated as the legal machinery ground forward. He tried to apologize, tried to explain, but I had nothing left to give him. No forgiveness, no understanding, no more chances. The wedding cancellations went better than expected. Most vendors were sympathetic when they heard family emergency and refunded deposits or offered future credits. The venue was the biggest loss. We'd lose that deposit entirely. But Richard Henderson, in a gesture of surprising kindness, made some calls and got us more back than we'd hoped for. "No child should lose their wedding day to their father's crimes," he told me. "Keep the money. Use it for whatever Sarah decides to do." Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it with Sarah, Emma, and Brandon's family. Tom spent it alone in our soon-to-be former house. I felt no pity. The part of me that might have felt sorry for him had calcified into something hard and immovable. By mid-December, the legal situation was clearer, if not better. Tom would face criminal charges for the fraud and tax evasion. He'd lose his professional license. He'd be financially ruined. I would be able to keep a portion of our assets, not enough to retire comfortably, but enough to start over. The divorce was proceeding rapidly, with Tom offering no resistance. He knew he had no leg to stand on. Sarah and Brandon decided to get married after all. but quietly. Just immediate family at City Hall, followed by dinner at a nice restaurant. No ice sculptures, no string quartets, no lies. Brandon's parents gave them a check for the honeymoon as a wedding gift. Emma served as witness and cried happy tears. I wore a simple blue dress and watched my daughter marry a good man who loved her, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. The ceremony was on a crisp January morning, in a small courthouse room with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that had nothing romantic about them. But when Sarah and Brandon exchanged vows they'd written themselves, speaking words of commitment and trust and partnership, it was more beautiful than any elaborate ceremony could have been. Because it was real, because it was honest, because it was built on a foundation of truth. "I promise to be your partner in everything," Brandon said, holding Sarah's hands, "to never hide from you, to always tell you the truth, even when it's hard, to build our life together on transparency and trust." Sarah's voice was steady despite her tears. "I promise to do the same, to question when things don't make sense, to speak up when I'm uncertain, to never let silence become a substitute for honesty. We're in this together, completely." I cried through the entire ceremony. These weren't tears of sadness, though. They were tears of relief. Relief that my daughter had learned the lesson I'd learned too late, that a marriage without honesty isn't a marriage at all. 2 weeks after the wedding, Tom's legal troubles officially became public. The news covered it briefly: local financial consultant charged with fraud and tax evasion, his face on the evening broadcast, looking haggard and old. I watched it in Sarah's living room and felt nothing. The man on the screen was a stranger to me now. The house sold in January. I took my portion of the proceeds and moved into a small apartment in downtown Evanston, within walking distance of the library where I still worked. It was quiet and clean and mine. Nobody had lied in these rooms. Nobody had stolen my peace of mind within these walls. Tom went to trial in March. I didn't attend, but Sarah did, supporting me by proxy. He pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence: 18 months in minimum security, 5 years probation, and full restitution to the banks and the IRS. His lawyer was Richard Henderson's personal recommendation, someone who got him the best deal possible under the circumstances. Even in disgrace, Tom benefited from the connections he'd tried so desperately to cultivate. I started therapy, real therapy, with a psychologist who specialized in financial abuse and marital betrayal. I learned that what Tom had done to me had a name: economic abuse. That the gaslighting and the hidden accounts and the control were all textbook behaviors. That I wasn't crazy or paranoid or overreacting. That my body's physical symptoms, the backaches, the headaches, the insomnia, were trauma responses. That I'd been living in a state of chronic stress for months, maybe years, without fully realizing it. The therapist taught me about the stages of recovery, about how healing isn't linear, about how some days I'd feel strong and empowered, and other days I'd feel like a fool for not seeing the signs sooner. She was right. There were days I wanted to scream at my past self for being so trusting, but mostly I was learning to be gentle with that version of Marie. She'd done the best she could with the information she had. Dr. Patricia Ramos was in her early 60s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense approach that I appreciated. Our sessions were in a cozy office in Oak Park, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting that somehow made it easier to talk about painful things. "What you experienced," she told me in one of our early sessions, "is a form of coercive control. Tom didn't need to be physically violent to exert power over you. He used financial manipulation, gaslighting, and the erosion of trust to maintain control." "But I'm educated," I said, feeling stupid even as the words left my mouth. "I work. I'm not some helpless victim. How did I not see it? Marie, financial abuse happens to people from all backgrounds and education levels. The most common factor isn't intelligence or awareness. It's trust. You trusted your partner. That's not a weakness. That's what you're supposed to do in a healthy relationship. Tom weaponized that trust against you. Her words helped, but the healing was still slow. Some days I'd wake up angry at Tom, at myself, at the whole situation. Other days, I'd feel strangely grateful that it had all come to light before more damage was done. Grateful that Sarah hadn't walked down that tainted aisle. Grateful that I still had time to build a different life. Emma started visiting me regularly in my new apartment. She'd bring her homework, and we'd sit together in comfortable silence, her studying for chemistry tests while I read or planned library programs. Sometimes we'd talk about what happened, sometimes we wouldn't. Just having her there, this fierce, perceptive young woman who'd helped save me from drowning, was healing in itself. "Grandma," she said one evening, looking up from her calculus textbook, "do you think you'll ever trust anyone again?" It was such a direct question, so Emma. I considered it carefully before answering. "I think I'm learning to trust myself again first," I said. "To trust my instincts, my observations, my right to ask questions. Once I'm solid in that, maybe I can trust someone else. But it'll be different. I won't trust blindly anymore." "Good," Emma said firmly. "Blind trust is for fairy tales. Real trust is built on proof and consistency and honesty." "When did you get so wise?" she grinned. "I learned from the best. You taught me to pay attention, Grandma, to trust my gut when something feels off. You probably didn't realize you were teaching me that, but you were." Sarah and Brandon bought a condo in Lincoln Park. They invited me over for dinner once a week, a standing Sunday tradition. We didn't talk about Tom unless I brought him up, which I rarely did. Instead, we talked about their jobs, their plans for the future, the possibility of children someday, normal family stuff, healing family stuff. One Sunday evening in late spring, as we sat on their balcony watching the sunset, Sarah brought up something that had clearly been on her mind. "Mom, I've been thinking about writing down what happened, not for publication or anything, just for myself, to process it all. Do you think that would help?" "I think whatever helps you heal is worth doing," I said. "Writing can be powerful. It forces you to organize your thoughts, to see patterns you might miss otherwise." "Would you read it if I wrote it?" "Of course, if you want me to." She nodded, looking relieved. "I just keep thinking about all the signs I missed. The way Tom always deflected questions about money, the way he'd change the subject when finances came up. I should have noticed. Sarah, you were his daughter, not his accountant. It wasn't your job to audit his behavior. And children, even adult children, are conditioned to trust their parents. That's normal and healthy. Tom's the one who betrayed that trust, not you for having it." "I know. Intellectually, I know, but emotionally." She trailed off, staring at the Chicago skyline. "Emotionally, you feel guilty. Like you should have protected me, or protected yourself, or seen it coming. I know, honey. I feel the same way. But we can't carry that guilt. It belongs to Tom, not to us." In April, I ran into Jessica, the bank teller who'd first warned me, at a coffee shop in Evanston. She recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Walsh, I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I said. "You tried to warn me. I should have listened sooner." "We're trained to spot financial abuse," she said quietly. "Patterns of control, hidden accounts, one partner being shut out." I couldn't say too much that day, privacy laws and all, but I hoped you'd hear what I wasn't saying directly. I did. Eventually. Thank you. She smiled. "You look good, really good, like yourself again." And I realized she was right. I did feel like myself, not the version who'd been married to Tom Walsh for 28 years, a version from before that, or maybe a new version entirely. Someone who knew her own worth, someone who wouldn't accept lies or manipulation or being treated as less than a partner. someone who'd been tested and had come through the fire, scorched but standing. By summer, I'd started dating. Nothing serious. Coffee dates with men I met through the library or mutual friends. It felt strange and exciting and terrifying, but also right. I was 56 years old, and I was reclaiming my life. The first date was with a man named David, a recently retired teacher who volunteered at the library. He was gentle and kind, with laugh lines around his eyes and a self-deprecating sense of humor that put me at ease. We met for coffee at a cafe in downtown Evanston on a Saturday morning. I have to be honest, I told him early in our conversation. I'm recently divorced. Very recently. And it was complicated. Complicated how? He asked, not seeming alarmed. My ex-husband committed fraud. He's currently serving time for tax evasion and forgery. So if you want to run screaming in the other direction, I'd understand. David considered this for a moment, then smiled. Did you commit fraud? No. Are you serving time? No. Then I don't see why his crimes should reflect on you. We're all responsible for our own choices, Marie, not the choices of the people we loved. It was such a simple statement, but it made me want to cry, because he was right. Tom's crimes were Tom's, not mine, not Sarah's, not our family's, his alone. The date with David went well, and we saw each other a few more times. It didn't develop into anything serious. We were better as friends than romantic partners. But it showed me that I could do this. I could put myself out there. I could risk trusting again, carefully, and with my eyes open. Tom sent letters from prison. I didn't read them. Sarah offered to screen them for me, in case there was anything important about the legal proceedings, but there never was. Just apologies and explanations and justifications, words that meant nothing anymore. One evening in July, I sat on my small balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, stressed and anxious, planning a wedding while her world crumbled in secret. I thought about that dinner table, the shock of Sarah saying, "Cancel it," the exposure of every lie. And I realized I was grateful. Grateful it had all fallen apart when it did, in a way that forced the truth into the light. Because here's what I learned from this whole nightmare. Emotional and financial abuse doesn't just affect your bank account. It affects your body, your mind, your sense of reality. It makes you doubt yourself, question your perceptions, accept treatment you'd never tolerate if you could see it clearly. The stress manifests physically. Those weren't just wedding jitters making me sick. That was my body screaming that something was wrong, trying to warn me in the only way it could. Research shows that financial abuse is one of the most powerful tools of control in relationships. It's insidious because it's often invisible to outsiders, even to the victim themselves. You can't see the bruises. You can't photograph the evidence. It's just numbers and accounts and decisions made behind closed doors. But the damage is real. The trauma is real. If you're listening to this and something sounds familiar, if you don't have access to your own money, if your partner makes financial decisions without consulting you, if there are accounts you don't know about or debts you didn't authorize, please listen to that voice inside that's telling you something's wrong. You're not paranoid. You're not overreacting. Trust your instincts. Talk to someone safe, a lawyer, a financial advisor, a therapist. Document everything you can. Take photos, save emails, keep records. You might need them someday, and it's better to have evidence you never use than to need evidence you don't have. And know this, it's not your fault. You didn't cause this. You didn't deserve this. Love and trust are beautiful things, and someone weaponized them against you. That's on them, not you. The healing takes time. Some days you'll feel strong. Some days you'll feel like you're back at square one. That's normal. That's okay. Keep going. Keep fighting for yourself. Keep believing that you deserve better, because you do. I've learned to recognize the warning signs now, not just in relationships, but in all areas of my life. That uneasy feeling in your stomach when something doesn't add up. The way you start making excuses for someone's behavior, rationalizing things that don't make sense. The gradual erosion of your confidence in your own judgment. These aren't character flaws. They're alarm bells, and I'll never ignore them again. As for me, I'm building a new life. Brick by brick, choice by choice. I have my daughter, my granddaughter, my work, my friends. I have my small apartment where nobody lies to me. I have my independence and my peace of mind and my self-respect. Tom took a lot from me, but he didn't take everything. The parts that matter, my strength, my intelligence, my capacity to love, those are still mine. Sarah asked me recently if I regretted the years with Tom, if I wished I could go back and do it differently. And honestly, I don't know. Those 28 years gave me my daughter. They taught me lessons I needed to learn, even if the tuition was painful. They showed me what I'm capable of surviving, what I'm capable of fighting through. Sometimes I wonder what I would tell my younger self, that woman standing in the kitchen 28 years ago, falling in love with a charming financial consultant who seemed to have all the answers. Would I tell her to run? To demand full transparency from day one? To never, ever cede control of her own financial security? Maybe. But that woman wouldn't have listened. She needed to learn these lessons her own way, even if the cost was devastating. But I'll tell you what I don't regret. Finding out the truth. Acting on it. Refusing to accept the lies anymore. That moment when I stopped trusting blindly and started investigating, that was me saving my own life. And I'll never regret that. So here I am, a year later, on my balcony, with my wine and my sunset and my hard-won peace. Tom is in prison. Sarah is happily married. Emma is thriving in school. And I am free. It's not the ending I planned when we started planning that wedding, but it's an ending I can live with. More than that, it's an ending I can build from. To everyone listening from wherever you are tonight, whether you're in New York or Los Angeles, Chicago, or some small town in between, thank you for staying with me through this story. If you found it helpful, if it resonated with you or helped you see something in your own life more clearly, hit that like button. Leave a comment telling me what city you're listening from and what you would have done in my situation. I read every comment, and your support means everything. And if you want to make sure you don't miss the next story, subscribe to the channel. There's a video about a woman who discovered her sister was stealing her identity, and another about a mother-in-law who tried to sabotage her son.